If you're trying to conceive, timing sex matters. You want to make sure that there is sperm ready and available to meet that egg just before ovulation happens. Which means you need to be having sex just before ovulation happens. If you miss this window, you miss the chances of getting pregnant in that particular cycle. So the real question becomes, how do I know when I'm going to ovulate? If you've watched my video on finding your fertile window, you'll know that there's a number of ways that you can use to predict when your body is about to ovulate. But for the purpose of this video, I'm going to focus on one particular thing, and that is a tool called the Ovulation Predictor Kit, or an ovulation test, which is a simple little test that can give you the heads up on when you're approaching ovulation. If you've never heard of an OPK, do not worry, because in this video, I am going to go through what an OPK is, what it's measuring, and how you can use it at home to take the guesswork out of finding when you're going to ovulate and timing sex much more accurately. When you're trying to conceive, ovulation is the single most important event in your cycle, because that is the time when a little egg that's been living inside the follicle, inside the ovary, gets released out of the ovary and has the potential to meet up with sperm and get fertilized. That is the only way a pregnancy can happen. So whether you're having sex every day or you're only having sex at a particular time, pregnancy is still only possible if sperm reaches a viable egg in time. So at the start of your cycle, which is from day 1 of your bleed, your body starts gearing you up for ovulation, for this main event. And what your body does is it starts secreting hormones that get the ball rolling. So in the follicular phase, the hormone that gets released is called follicle stimulating hormone, or FSH. And as the name suggests, it stimulates these little follicles that house the eggs to grow. Now, these little follicles have a layer of cells surrounding them that start secreting estrogen the bigger and more mature they get. So the more FSH that's being released, the more the follicles start growing and maturing, the more estrogen gets released, and the overall concentration of estrogen in your body rises. After a couple of days of these little follicles getting this stimulation from the hormones, there will eventually be a front runner. And we call this front runner the lead follicle. And that lead follicle is going to grow bigger than the others. And eventually that will be the follicle that gets ovulated, i.e. that ruptures during ovulation. And the little egg that lives inside that follicle is the one that gets released out into the open. And that's the egg that can then eventually get fertilized and possibly become a baby. The problem comes in that this little egg that will eventually get released has a very, very short lifespan. It only lasts around 24 hours once it has left the ovary, which means that there is only a 24-hour window to get sperm to the egg in order for it to fertilize. If sperm gets there late and that egg is no longer viable, then pregnancy cannot occur that month, no matter how much sex is being had. It's essentially a wasted month. So once ovulation happens, the clock starts ticking. And that is why knowing when you ovulate can be the game changer and the very thing that you need to get pregnant in a cycle. Because if you know when you're about to ovulate, you can know when to time sex correctly to make sure that sperm is there, ready and waiting when that little egg gets released, and you are giving that sperm the most chance possible to reach a viable egg in time, which then gives you the most chance possible of getting pregnant in that cycle. And that is why having a tool such as an ovulation predictor kit, or an OPK as they're commonly used, is a really, really cool tool to have in your toolbox. Because this nifty little device that you can use in the comfort of your own home can let you know when your body is gearing up for ovulation. And then you can take whatever steps you feel necessary in the days leading up to that. So if you have never seen an ovulation predictor kit before, let me show them to you. This is what they look like. They come in a number of different shapes and sizes, and their prices vary accordingly as well. So you can get ones that are like little test strips, or ones that look like home pregnancy tests, which is the two that I have over here. But then you also get a digital one that's slightly more expensive than these, but for some people they might be a little bit easier to read. For other people, they find them a little bit more daunting and a little bit more confusing. But there is really no right or wrong one to use, and the choice is yours. So I'm going to take them out and just show you what they look like. So this is a little test strip one. So that's what it looks like. I don't know how well you can see that. And as you can see, there is a little line there, and that tells you where the urine needs to be placed on. And then over here, we have this tiny little piece in the middle here is the test window. Now, when this test gets dunked in urine, so you can have a little cup like this that you would put this test into, as opposed to trying to hold it in place and have a wee on something that's this thin, you will get lines that appear in this little test window, very much like a pregnancy test. And it's the lines that appear in there that give you the results of the test. So this is the little test strip, and then there are also these ones that look like pregnancy tests. So just slightly a little bit more robust in their packaging. And this is a one that you can also dip into your urine sample, or you can hold it in a stream of urine on the toilet. And again, on something like this, that is where the test window would be. That will give you your results. Now, the way OPKs work is they measure a hormone in your urine called luteinizing hormone, or LH. And that's why sometimes these tests are called LH strips. But what luteinizing hormone is, it is a hormone that gets secreted from the pituitary gland in the brain in response to rising levels of estrogen. Now, like I said previously, when your follicles are being stimulated to grow, the cells in their lining start making more and more and more estrogen. And eventually that estrogen reaches like a peak level. And when estrogen gets to that level, it sends a message to the brain to say, hey, we've got a lead follicle that is ready to be ovulated. And so what the brain then does is it interprets the signal and goes, okay, we need to release luteinizing hormone in order for ovulation to happen. The pituitary gland in the brain then starts secreting this luteinizing hormone in pulses over the next 1 to 2 days. These surges of luteinizing hormone are what trigger the egg to be released from the ovary during ovulation. So these test strips pick up the presence of luteinizing hormone in the urine. And when it picks up a high enough concentration of luteinizing hormone, it will give you a positive response. And then you know that within the next 24 hours or so, your body is going to ovulate. And then, as I said, if you know you're going to ovulate, you can then time your evening, your life, your schedule, whatever it is that you and your partner need to do to get together to be having intercourse so that sperm is there ready and waiting when ovulation occurs. Now, once you've done the test, it is very important to know what a positive test looks like. And that can sometimes get a little bit tricky. So when you're looking at a test, there should always be a line that is present. And that line is called the control line. And what that line actually does is it tells you that the test is working properly. So, for example, I've just dunked this test in water, but as you can see in that little circle there is a line. And that line is the control line and tells us that the test is actually functional. If you do a test and you see no lines at all, or there is no line by the control side, then that test is not a functional test and you need to throw it away and not pay any attention to it. But in a case like this test is working as there is a definite control line. When it comes to the ovulation predictor kits, that second line, if there is one, and in this case there is none, so my water is not ovulating, which is great. That second line that should appear, if it is picking up LH surges, needs to be as dark or darker than the control line in order for it to indicate a positive. If you see a second line and it is lighter than the control line, it's showing that LH, that hormone, is being picked up in your body, but it is not at high enough concentrations to trigger ovulation. And what you're going to do in a case like that is you're going to continue testing until you see that the test line, so the second line, is either as dark as or darker than the control line. When you see that, that is considered a positive. And then you know, like I said, that in about 24 to 36 hours, your body is going to be ovulating. And exactly the same thing will happen for a test like this, a little test strip. I don't know if you can see my very little faint control line there. There it is. And there is no second line because, again, I'm using water. But that would be an indication that the test is negative, and we want to see a second line that's as dark or darker than that control line before we get excited and know that we're about to ovulate. The digital tests can sometimes be a little bit more direct and give you an indication that you are in fact ovulating, like it'll say positive, or it'll say peak, or it'll have a happy smiley face or something like that. And so interpreting them might be slightly easier. However, they also can sometimes test for a bunch of different things. Like it can test for an estrogen surge or peak estrogen levels or something like that. And that is included in the test window, and then that can sometimes get a little bit more confusing. So I actually like these plain, simple, straightforward ones that just give the lines because they're actually easier for me to interpret. So now that you know how they work and how a test is done, the next important thing is to know when to start testing. Because we want to get in with the testing well before we ovulate, so that we have less chance of accidentally missing that fertile window because we started testing too late. And when to start testing is going to be very dependent on you and your cycle alone, because it will depend on how many days are in your cycle. Remember, cycles can range from 21 days to 35 days, and therefore the day of ovulation can also vary just as greatly from person to person. If you have a cycle that is not the same length month after month after month, that is also going to affect on what day you ovulate. So first and foremost, you need to work out how long your cycle is. And the way that you tell how long your cycle is counting the days from day one of your bleed until day one of the very next bleed. And a simple rule of thumb is you're going to want to take the halfway mark of that. The halfway mark of that would be, call it 10 and a half days, 10, 11 days. So you're going to imagine that you are bound to ovulate around day 10 or 11 of your cycle. But you want to start testing a couple of days before you ovulate so that you can catch that LH surge. So you're going to want to start testing then around day 6, day 5 or day 6. You're going to want to test from then until you get your positive result. Now, if we look at somebody that's got a slightly longer cycle, so somebody that's got, say, 35 days in between their bleeds, you're again going to divide that by half. So 35 divided by 2, you're going to imagine that you're ovulating around day 17 or so. So you then want to start testing around about day 13, so that you can also follow that trend and catch the start of the LH being secreted as well as the LH surge. And then you'll carry on until you get your peak, and then that's it for that cycle. And then you'll start again the following cycle if that cycle wasn't a success for you and you didn't get pregnant in that cycle. So as you can see, you're going to be testing for a number of days. And therefore, when you're looking at buying your ovulation predictor kits, you want to be able to get a couple of tests in a month. So you can buy these tests in multi-packs, like this one comes 5 in a box. I think this one also comes 5 in a box. And so knowing that is when costs start adding up, and that could be the determining factor of whether or not you're going to go for the digital, which is quite pricey, or these cheaper ones, because you can get a whole lot more for a decent price. And you need a whole lot when you're testing. And now I just want to quickly go over some best practice guidelines for you that help make testing a lot easier and help you avoid some of the rookie mistakes, which could lead you to misinterpreting the test and then not getting the results that you want. So number 1, don't test with your first morning urine. LH is secreted in pulses, and sometimes it can take a little while in the day for the concentration of LH to sort of accumulate. And if you test first thing in the morning, you may get a negative reading, not because LH isn't there, but because it hasn't quite made its way from your kidney, from your bloodstream and into your kidneys and into your bladder and then into your urine just yet. So if you test in the morning and see a negative, you might think, okay, I haven't got a positive test for that day, so I'm not ovulating anytime soon. When in actual fact, if you tested a couple of hours later, say around midday, you may actually get a positive test then. So I like to tell the ladies that I work with to rather test with your mid-morning urine or even your afternoon or evening urine. Those tend to be a lot more accurate with how much LH is detected in the urine. And that ties hand in hand with point number 2, and that is don't only test one time a day. Because you run the risk of possibly missing a surge because it just hadn't made its way to your bladder and out into your urine yet. Whereas if you're testing, say, mid-morning and in the evening, you are far less likely to miss one of the surges. So do you see why you need a whole bunch of tests when you're doing ovulation testing? Point number 3 is that you don't want to be overly hydrated. You don't want to dilute your urine too much when you're about to take the test, because having a really diluted urine can also cause the test to not pick up a high enough concentration in your urine. And it's going to then give you a negative result when in actual fact there is LH in the bloodstream and you are going to be ovulating soon. Then what you want to do is you want to take all of your tests and keep them as a track record of what's happening. So a lot of ladies like to write on the actual test themselves or get a piece of paper and stick each test on with writing the date and if it was a morning or an evening sample next to it. And that allows you to track your results. Because let's say you start seeing that second line appearing, but it's not quite as dark as you want it to be to consider it a positive. You don't want to be testing the next day and wonder, what did I actually see yesterday? Was it as dark as this morning? What's going on? It's so much easier to be able to track if you have a visual log of all the tests that you're taking. And then that can show you a lovely trend. You might be able to see every time you test that second line is getting darker and darker and darker until you get that beautiful peak result. And then you know, okay, definitely I've reached peak and I'm going to ovulate in a couple of days. The 4th mistake is misreading the test. So as we spoke about earlier, when looking at the test, one line is the control line, the other line is the test line, and we need the test line to be as dark as or darker than the control line in order to get a positive. If you just see that second line, it is not necessarily an indication that the test is positive yet. So keep testing until you get that darker line. And another very important thing to remember is that cycles can vary. Month to month, person to person, there are a number of things that can make you ovulate later or earlier than what you expected. And that's why we like to start testing a few days before we expect you to ovulate. But the same can be said for ovulating later. Stress, illness, deadlines at work, sports events that have got you training like crazy, any kind of disruption to your system can delay ovulation. And so sometimes women think, okay, my cycle is usually X amount of days, I'm going to start testing now. They test for 2 or 3 days, and for 2 or 3 days, there is just a stark white test window on all of the tests. And then that can sometimes be discouraging because you think, oh my word, like my system is not working well. I don't know what's going on. I'm clearly not even ovulating at all. I'm having anovulatory cycles, when in actual fact, you're just out a little bit. Your ovulation may be delayed by a week or so. And so the mistake would be to start testing and then stop testing too early. And I know you're probably thinking, oh my word, like how many of these tests do I actually need to do and use just to find when I'm ovulating? And a word of encouragement is that in the beginning, it's probably a little bit more difficult to predict and to plan. But as you start getting to know your body a little bit better and your cycles a little bit better, you might be able to hone in on when you are more than likely to ovulate. And then you can start minimizing how many tests you're using. But another really good thing you can do instead of using just ovulation predictor kits is take the information from the predictor kits, but superimpose it on looking at the other biomarkers that your body gives you on a month-to-month basis. If you want to learn more about those biomarkers, I've got a video linked up here that you can go and have a look at, where we talk about all these things that tell you how to read the messages that your body is giving you, and that can also help you really know what is actually going on under the surface without the need for testing. And then this just becomes a nice little tool to use alongside looking at your natural biological markers. And probably my favorite biomarker that I teach most women to pay attention to if they are wanting to learn about their bodies and predict when they're going to ovulate and if they're fertile and all of that kind of stuff is cervical mucus. So in this next video that YouTube is going to suggest, I'm going to be going through everything that has to do with cervical mucus, what it is, how to look for it, how to interpret it, and how to use it to get you pregnant faster or to pick up any problems that might be arising, and you can get those checked in a much faster time than if you didn't know what was going on. So be sure to check out this video if you're interested in that. Anyway, thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you in the next one. Take care. Bye.